ladies and gentlemen. Welcome for being on the show today. And we have two guests to have the opportunity to review the question, artificial intelligence, what is its impact on the world of working? That's the title. We're going to try to stay to that, but as the panelists and myself been discussing here, it's really difficult to do because it ties into so many other industries and so many other issues. So we're going to try to keep it compact and keep the discussion on different levels going and connecting on levels that ideas my friends here have presented that I'm not sure I totally understand. And that's what makes it very exciting to me today. First of all, let me introduce the two presenters and guests. First of all, Carlos Bakota, Ph.D., offering expertise in social development, educational, and foreign affairs issues in 3 continents. More than 10 years of university teaching and administration, both overseas and in the United States. Specialization in United States Latino, Latin America social history, and American studies. The second person I'm very, very proud to have on the program. Let me first of all just give you the superficial side of it. Francisco Hernandez Vazquez, PhD, Professor Emeritus, History of Ideas, Hutchins School of Liberal Studies, Sonoma State University. His bio is tremendously long as well, but I have something special to say. He is one of my longest friends. We've been together for 50 some odd years. He's been my mentor. I consider him a great friend who's always shown me that there's new ways of thinking in the world. So I want to thank Francisco for that as well, as he comes up from up north. Gentlemen, here we go. Here's the conversation. Artificial intelligence. Now that term is sort of very fluid. It's different people have different definitions. Its impact on work, its impact on society, its impact on La Raza, its impact on us, you and I, in our work. Who wants to go first?
Who wants to go first? Well, I think we should begin with today. And I think that we're already have maybe, 10 years, maybe, in this, at my work, the internet wasn't introduced into the federal government, into the State Department until the 90s, so, and by the 90s, there had already been all kinds of advances in using this stuff, right? There was all kinds of things, we couldn't even do like a FaceTime thing. We didn't have Zoom. So in order to communicate with another, someone in another country, you had to type up a text and a cable and all this kind of stuff. And people were very, very concerned about bringing in, laptops into the office because we would, be playing around. I think that's what they thought. We'd be doing our own personal business with a laptop. And so, we're in it already. Since the 90s, since the 70s, and since last year, actually, it's only been a year ago that the IA stuff has become, to the attention of at least a part of the discussion about the uses of our laptops and our internets. I was listening to one expert say, they asked him the future, what is the future? And he said, well, it's hard, to talk about the future, but I think that maybe our future lies within the next 2 months to 6 months. Within the next 2 months, we are going to see big changes. If it doesn't happen in 2 months, it'll happen in 6 months, right? And what he was saying is that, we're going to have a more robust kind of usage of the internet technology. So that, it seems after reading a lot of this stuff that what we're going to do is be putting more power, more information, and different ways of getting it but we're already like our children, like my grandchildren, you know, are totally comfortable in a virtual world and using the technology and all of that. And I think that's one of the reality, you know, someone described what people feel now is this reality empathy, that, you know, okay, virtuality is here, it's part of our reality. Okay, and so what? You know, but then there's the question of, you know, what's it going to do? Is it going to take jobs away from people? And we can get into that if you want. But, you know, my from my perspective right now is that all of the AI people that I listen to feel that we are already, you know, at a place where the changes are, because we've become so accustomed to using it already, that the changes are going to happen right away. And, you
Okay.
know, we may not even notice
Okay.
them.
Okay. I get that perception. Francisco?
Yeah, I think Carlos's point is very well taken. It's the speed of change. I mean, you can look up the statistics, but you know, what used to happen every 100 years, now it happens in less than a year in terms of changes. So that's, I think Carlos is referring to. And I think that to me, the question of artificial intelligence, um, which means, you know, machines or applications or computers that can actually do things that humans are unable to do in terms of processing information and gathering knowledge. I was talking to my mentor, who is 84 years, a woman,
Young.
a professor from the Hutchins School of Liberal Studies. She was telling me, he said, you know, I was born in a ranch in Wisconsin, and I remember how happy I was when they invented the phonograph, so I could listen to classical music in, you know, anytime I wanted to, as opposed to waiting for the one program in the radio, you know. And now she says one of the positive things about these advances, she says, I can access any kind of information anywhere in the world anytime I want. She says, you know, that's, you know, we live in an era where like nobody has ever been here before. And so you got those, you know, the whole thing of change. But I think that correct me if I'm wrong, Armando, but I think that the internet, the federal government might not have been into the internet, but the armed forces were the ones who actually invented the internet, in the sense that they wanted to come up with a system that was decentralized. And in case of a nuclear attack, they could communicate with each other, and they kind of broke into the open, and then it reached the commercial world, and here we are. So my point is that beyond or behind the speed, the rate of change, and the tremendous advances that, as Carlos says, could just overturn our reality anytime and change the world very quickly in 3 months or so. That world, what my question would be, what is the intention and what is the goal behind that kind of change? Where,
Well,
is
yeah.
anybody even asking, you know, what's the best thing for society, or are we just asking what's the best thing for me? And even, you know, once you get into an arms or a discovery competition, then there's no stopping, because everybody wants to outdo each other. And if there's money to be made, you want to get there first.
Well, yes,
Let me interject here. Let me interject here on that perspective. Um, it's also becoming the 2, 3 major AI companies, Google, Apple, and Qualcomm, and all the others that are involved.
Microsoft.
They're all trying to beat out each other, even though they're putting out haphazard softwares just to beat each other up, because there is a profit margin in there somewhere. they want to take in the market. And it isn't even the software, it's the number of people they can drive in to use it, and then they can market to them and make profit out of it. But we're going haphazardly creating all this software in a haphazard speed where I'm not sure anyone really knows what its full impact is, or people even stop to think about it.
I don't think people stop to think about it any longer. I think we accept Amazon, knowing what books I read, and I don't care if Amazon knows what books I read. But what I see as a real important problem here is, as Pancho mentioned about the military's interest in this thing for decentralizing the military. I didn't know that, but I came at it from Dartmouth. Dartmouth is where the first computer was put together and everything, and there was this bidding war to fund it, right? And it ended up that General Electric, gave them like $1 billion to move it along, right? To move it along quickly and to make sure they had the funding. And then General Electric, would saw in it a great possibility for selling refrigerators, and they saw its use not just in making refrigerators, but more importantly in selling the refrigerators, so that the whole model for IA seems to be based on the concept of efficiency, but efficiency is defined very narrowly in terms of profit margins. And what's happening today, what I'm hearing, reading, and seeing is that there are a number of people who say maybe efficiency, the concept, the definition of efficiency should be broadened to include things like the environment, like health, social services. In other words, what's missing right from the beginning of this thing are the ethics that say that this should be used and can be used and hasn't been used really in creating an egalitarian society, but it can.
Okay, but let me go back to the question. These are all relevant issues. I don't want to diminish anything, but let me go back to the initial question. Is artificial machines with a higher intelligence ability, i.e. intelligence, I'm using very softly here, the ability to learn how to process things on their own. There's a memory capacity, i.e. a small brain inside the computer. As they grow in speed and velocity and in cost diminishing, are they going to displace a large number of people? And if so, what's going to happen to those people? Or is that not in the formula? Or we're just so concerned on, let's go to the next level of progress, and what happens to the employees? I don't know. We'll worry about that later.
Oh, but see, excuse me, but that notion of employment and what you do with people has to be put up part of the definition of what's efficient.
Yeah,
what's efficient is what creates social well-being. If you're a liberal or if you're a Democrat, you don't have to be a communist to want everyone, or a Benthamite to make to desire that what your product may have functions that lead us to a better sense of equality in our lives, that people have more access to social services.
Yeah, I agree with you, Carlos, but I think that you're framing the question in moral terms, which,
of course,
hold on, which I like, of course. In fact, in thinking about this, I was thinking of Martin Luther King talking about how moral laws of the universe are just as abiding as the physical laws, right?
Good.
There's a moral universe. But my premise, see, you're talking from what ought to be. I'm talking from, or I like to see things from the way they ought to be in terms of morality and ethics, but I also like to see things from the way that they are now. and the way that they are now in terms of, let's look at the states that have denied people Medicaid. Okay.
Yeah.
Even though the federal government provides it, they actually deny it. So what that tells me, and the way that insurance are dealing with people, basically the value of human bodies has diminished. So we don't really care what happens to people if they're sick or if they die. We don't care as long as we have productive capability.
Who's the, I'm sorry, who is
Wait,
the
wait, wait,
we?
wait. Hold up. Give me a sec. Pancho?
Yeah, as long as we have, as long as we continue to make money and continue to make profits and continue to be the greatest nation in the world, we don't necessarily care what happens to the people mining the cobalt in the Congo. We don't really care. And I think for me, the fear is that artificial intelligence is prefacing a shift. I mean, you remember, we're talking about, liberal studies and liberal studies education and how that might help workers, right? Liberal studies came upon at a time when if there was a monarchy, there was Catholicism, and then that shifted into science. And here we are. But it was at the beginning, it was led by human values. My fear is that human values are not important anymore. It's efficiency that's the most important. In which case the problem is not what's going to happen to the workers. The problem, I think you're framing it correctly, Carlos, is that why is it that ethics is not the number one goal of society as opposed to efficiency? That's the question that we need to be asking.
Let me throw in a monkey wrench on top of that, Pancho, and I'm taking this in a slightly different direction, but I'm working with a concept you presented. Is that part of the reason why we don't seem to be moving forward in any shape or form on a major level for homelessness?
Yeah.
It's not, they're not part of the efficiency formula. They've dropped out. They're part of the side. So let's move on with what is productive.
Yeah, I think that, the capitalist class, the ruling class has decided that about 20% of the population is non-productive. So if you look at the alternative right ideology, it's like you should really not provide any social services to people who are not productive. Gutting Social Security, gutting Medicare, all of these policies clearly indicate to me that human values are changing and we don't no longer care what happens to humans unless they're productive. And I think that people who believe in that don't realize that with artificial intelligence, they themselves will become obsolete if they don't take into consideration the kinds of questions that Carlos is raising about ethics.
Carlos?
I think that I agree with most of what Pancho says. I don't know who the we he refers to might be. It's not Armando, it's not Carlos, and it's not Pancho, and it's definitely not the people in academics at the research centers that are teaching, computer science, and they're teaching IA. Those kinds of people are very thoughtful, very, very thoughtful. And and they're very, very concerned about ethics. There are two countries. I know I go on, but there are two countries in the world that have done very, very well with using digitalization of governance, of all kinds of things have been. They're the ones that have gone the furthest with this. One is Estonia. Estonia. What do I know about Estonia? The only thing I know about Estonia right now is that they're doing wonders with the technology, with the information technology. They're using it to guide. There are solutions to social problems, to housing, to homelessness, to education, to a whole bunch of stuff. Okay, that's Estonia. Has the highest GNP, per capita, and is a very successful, prosperous country. The other one is the city of Singapore. And Singapore is also, way up there among the most, productive and the most efficient in a general sense in terms of employment and all of those kinds of things. So there are two models, at least out there, that have put ethics into the equation of efficiency. And there are other things. Los Angeles, one more thing, Armando. Los Angeles, and then they're using AI to find, how should we do this?
No, I'm not talking about not using or using AI. I'm saying whether AI will be the choice between hiring an individual or hiring an AI. AI works 24/7, doesn't get hurt, doesn't need any kind of medical support. But by the same token, what are we diminishing the need for people to have worthwhile employment? And if so, what's the impact they're going to be if we keep on this mindset, which I believe is where we're at. Let me divert over a little bit. Also, let me bring in someone else, a question that I received from Dr. Thelma T. Reyna. We always want to say hi to her. She
Hi.
had a question that she wants to present to the committee here. So here's her question. What are some of the more common widespread areas of work within AI will have a major big impact? Examples of career fields or specific jobs?
Armando, there's one job that everyone agrees will put people out of work, and that's the call centers. Where you have a problem with your internet. Call centers, the banks use them, everybody uses these call centers, and the AI will allow them to respond to a question. How do I fix the app on my laptop, and there'll be this automated person, you would write him a sentence, and then you write her a sentence, and it'll write you back based on all the information that it could find on that, and you'll have it there. And we're getting real close to that. Like my bank, it's always, hello, this is the automated system, blah 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 blah. And then I have to go through their queries and their questions, and then finally I get an agent, right? I have to wait a half an hour to get an agent. The first person that picks up the phone is an IA, it's a computer automated generated kind of voice. But it seems that from what I've read from the people working in the field, they're more concerned about white collar work, office work. Yeah, that we should be careful at where the unemployment might come from, and then how to retrain them. If it's going to be white collar workers, people working in call centers, people straightening out budgets, accounting, and all that kind of stuff, that's where this model will probably cause some problems in terms of unemployment. But as I mentioned before, I think that in the definition of efficiency, there should be an element of at least an awareness. How many people are you going to how many people are going to be unemployed because of the use of this in this particular system, and is that good for the economy?
Yeah, I think any job that depends on pattern recognition processes and then application of those patterns into say writing. So anybody who's doing writing with a chat GPT may be out of a job. I think, Armando, you sent an article about Amazon publishing books that are written by chatbots. So any job that depends on pattern recognition, artificial intelligence can do that better than humans and more efficiently, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I think, I mean, even doctors, for example, robots are doing surgery better than human doctors. They can do diagnosis better than doctors because they can access more information than one human doctor can possibly access. So pretty much any kind of, I guess if you look at the other side, service jobs are the only ones that are needed where personal attendants are necessary. But I think that kind of throws us into another question, because we seem to be circling around like the big elephants in the room. Long time ago, I think back in the maybe late 50s, early 60s, somebody wrote a book about the workless society. I forgot the author. Carlos, you might remember, but the workless society was already saying back then, we have to come up with a system to provide a living income for everybody who will not be working. And we have to come to terms with the fact that if we have machines to create wealth and production, then we need to use that wealth and production to benefit all of society. Now, in a capitalist system, that is not acceptable because that smells like socialism. So again, it's a problem of values. Do you value human life and human dignity as being inherent? Or do you value human life and human dignity only to the extent that it is profit making? And I think those are the questions that are not being debated in this whole question of artificial intelligence.
Something that Pancho, you mentioned, Alan Turing back in 1940, he was figuring out how to break the German enigma. He said a question which I've been dabbling with and not really understanding until right now. And the question was, when an individual can no longer tell whether you're talking to a human or a computer, then the computer has won out. And now you mentioned now that we're in this world of the chats, and where in the next 5 to 10 years, I won't know if I'm really talking to a human being or a computer. I believe that is coming real quickly. Upon that level, then I don't know if I'm really talking to a real attorney or a real judge or a real doctor or a real psychologist anymore. And if we as a society lose the clarity, then all jobs are up for grab.
Okay, let me just add one thing that I left out very quickly, is that the only difference in terms of artificial intelligence doing pattern recognition better than humans, the only factor that differentiates humans is consciousness. So computers, artificial intelligence can do all of this without consciousness. So we are decoupling knowledge from consciousness. We can do a lot of, I drive my car from here to LA 2-3 times a month, pretty much unconsciously. I'm awake, I'm conscious, but I'm not thinking about it because my body, all the algorithms from driving so many years, I do it automatically, right? But in terms of pattern recognition and consciousness, now consciousness is needed in order to have ethics, what Carlos is talking about. If you don't have, computers don't have feelings. We have not been able to program feelings into computers. So there's still a difference between humans and artificial intelligence. And the difference is that artificial intelligence doesn't have consciousness. And then, go back to 2001 Space Odyssey with HAL that killed the astronauts in order to save the mission, because his directive was to save the mission.
Yeah,
It's,
there's
that's what we're at right now.
Carlos?
yeah. We tend to use the language that we're familiar with, and you know, maybe the younger generation, you know has a different way of expressing themselves. But unfortunately, you know, we have this notion that we train the computer as if we could train it, as if it were a person. We can teach it as if teaching is something that at least in my mind, is people to be, you know, you teach something and it learns, right? There's a teaching mechanism going on somewhere. That doesn't happen. We don't teach it anything. We program it, we construct it to give us certain kinds of outcomes. The new chat thing is interesting because it collects an enormous amount of information, you know, more information than we've ever had available before, supposedly. It's universal. And it collects all the information, then it sends the information to the place where it's trained. You know, and we train the information to give us certain kinds of answers, right, that we're looking for. So it's not, you know, it's there are two boxes. One box gets the information, and then it sends the information over to this other box that has all these questions that it has to answer, and it answers them as best it can. But I think that, to get back to your question of the, you know, are you talking to a real person or a chat guy or woman, is that, you know, there has to be some regulatory, you know, legislation put in place that makes it clear to you what you're seeing, right, or what you're hearing.
Okay, gentlemen, let me sort of package a little bit of what you guys said, and I'm going to put it at a point. Somebody brought up to me and says, you know, computers are not very smart. And I said, why not? And then he says, because they can't write a beautiful symphony. And I thought about it a few seconds, and my response was, well, neither can I, and I don't consider myself dumb. This is just not my area. But we don't need computers to be conscious. We need computers to do the work. We need them to move the heavy stuff from here to there, for airplanes to fly by themselves, for trains to move by themselves, for trucks to move by themselves, for whole factories to work by themselves, i.e. Amazon. And if this trend continues, we're going to have a lot of people off on the streets, you know, and yeah, you know, maybe none of us can write beautiful symphonies and be able to write beautiful poetry. But the problem is, we're still back to the question, will AI displace people? And if so, how do we correct it? If there's a way to correct it, or do we continue with this lack of ethics and say, you know, profit is numero uno, and we're going to go until we exhaust it? Where are we in the middle of all this discussion?
I would say that the people who are working on this are just as concerned as you are about that, you know, that they are really concerned about how to make, you know, civil society goals part of an efficiency solution, you know, part of an efficient solution. I think, and the other thing is that we talked about gender, you know, we're going to talk about gender, and a lot of women are involved at these places that are doing this work.
They're all being impacted, that's for sure.
Yeah, women are having an impact on this. They're bringing in, you know, nurturing values, if that's what women can do. But they're doing a lot, you know, and so women are in that labor force. I think that our concern is really the top concern right now among the people who are working in the field. They're really worried that we're going to continue with this profit-making definition of efficiency and just use efficiency rather than, you know, using it for the improvement of our existence on the planet, and that's what it should be.
Yeah, no, I'm in awe of all of the people at all levels of society who are fighting the anti-humanistic trends embedded in artificial intelligence and corporations that are in competition to build the most efficient computers in order to maximize their profits. I am in awe, and I think the world goes around thanks to all of the people who are working so hard, struggling so hard for social justice. But my concern is I'll give you a very quick example of something that you both know as the Black Legend. The Black Legend goes the anti-Mexican, anti-Catholic, anti-Spanish sentiment in the United States and in Great Britain goes back to the 16th century, and it has persisted up until today due to something that is called the textual authority. So when you were a student and you went to write a paper, you went and got a bunch of books from the library, you looked at them, you got information relevant to your topic, you wrote your paper, you submitted the paper. Unless you were very, very good and very analytical as to what you're really doing, you were replicating a lot of the biases. And this was done over centuries, and that's why we still have the Black Legend today. And you have Trump talking about Mexicans being thieves and this and that. This goes back centuries. What I'm saying is that the textual authority, when artificial intelligence like the ChatGPT or any other one reaches out to the texts all over the world, what they're putting together is bringing back all those biases, whether misogynistic or racist or whatever. I read somewhere about, I'm sure you read too, that in one of the attempts by one of the companies to have a chatbot, it was insulting people and threatening to kill them. You know why? Not because they were conscious of what they were doing, and that's where the problem is. And Armando, you were saying, well, we just want him to do the work, but the problem is that the question of singularity is when they will begin to tell us what to do, and they will have the capability to say, if we say, no, I'm gonna turn the switch off, look what happened to the astronaut in 2001 Space Odyssey. He was trying to disconnect the machine and he failed. So anyway, so I think
that happened in MIT, where the two computers were talking and creating their own language, and they couldn't figure out what they were talking about, so they've had to find the switch and turn them off. That happened 2 years ago.
that's right.
Yeah,
right.
there's something that computers do. It's called hallucinate. And,
Yeah.
and that's when the wires get crossed. It's sort of like a short circuit in your radio or your TV or something. I don't know.
No. These ones, they were creating their own language. They
Yeah,
were
right,
they
right,
were
right,
breaking
right.
away completely from the developers.
Exactly, right.
They weren't
but
hallucinating. They were just taking off on their own.
Yeah, but the
creating their
guys
own
that work,
universe.
the people who work on these machines often refer to this particular problem
Okay.
as a hallucination. But can I give you one example of how on Pancho's Black Legend thing, the question of immigration. If you read any economist who's written on immigration in the last 10 years, right? And if you look at the federal immigration review, that's a scholarly publication that comes out, they all say that immigration is good for the United States, and the United States needs immigrants from all over the world, right? But that is a fact, right? That is a fact. The economists say we need all these people, but then we have another group of people who are saying, no, we don't like the Black Legend guys. We don't. They take jobs away from people and they're rapists and blah blah blah. The reality is that we need the Mexicans, but
Right.
people, that reality escapes everybody.
I think that what we have not talked about, but is the main problem, the main culprit here is ideology. So on the one hand, we know that we need ethics, and we know we need to help the homeless and the downtrodden and poor people, etc. But on the other hand, there's a very increasingly strengthening ideology that basically says, forget about people who are not productive, let them die. And to me, those are the questions we are facing, and they're being brought up to the surface by artificial intelligence.
Yeah, yeah. In one conversation between a panel, and they got to right where you are right now, and Armando, and where we're going with this, right? And the guy throws up his hands and he says, "Yeah, we have a worldwide labor market. You can hire people from all over the world, right? But what we need really is a universal decent wage." Now, hey man, I don't think AI can do that, because that's an ideological, as you say, component that has to be. If you could put a universal wage into a concept of efficiency, for a society to operate fully, that would really be great, because then you wouldn't have some companies getting someone from the Congo and paying them $15 an hour to come to New York to do a job that someone actually would get $150 an hour.
We're running out of time, so I'm sort of moving toward the closure of the program. So, there's a lot of concepts here being thrown in, and I think they're all workable if we think about it long enough. But as we're working toward our closing statement, each one of you will have 2 minutes to present your point. I just want to share, first of all, thank you both for being on the program. And the idea is that one question I'll throw, but I don't think we have time to address it, but I do want to, address it because you presented it. Because I've lived in Mexico as well, and I've traveled all 7 continents, here's the question. How many unemployed people can we have in a country before we start losing our security, regardless whether you're middle class or upper class? Can we afford to live in a community, in a country where 25, 30, 40, 80% of the people are unemployed? Where is our safety margin? And I think that sort of comes from the side of profits are over here, but if you have too many unemployed people, safety becomes the issue. And I think San Francisco is already suffering that question, where cars are being broken in, more and more crime is increasing because there's a lot of homeless there. But that's just a starting point. But before we go into that question in a future show, let me begin to give both of you your 2 minutes closing statement.
Yeah, dovetailing into your remarks, in the 80s, everyone was really hot on the Gini coefficient, and that was how much inequality you can have in a society before before democracy crumbles. Right, and some countries, I forget how it all worked, but like Brazil was way below the Gini coefficient, and we were okay, right? So there are ways of establishing what the economic conditions under which people will live in a democracy to have a democracy, and you have to have a certain degree of equality. What that degree of equality is, I don't know. I mean, there's always going to be people who don't want to work. I mean, we've seen that with the homeless problem. Maybe 5% don't want to. They don't want to live inside. They rather. That's irrelevant. But anyway, we have markers. We have algorithms. The Gini coefficient is an algorithm that could be put into to any algorithm for governance, or for environmental issues, or for any kinds of stuff. The administration of the public sector has to be made more ethical and not ideological, because that's a dangerous word, right? And then the other issue that I'd like to close with is we're already in it. What's going to happen, it's just going to get more robust what we have. We're going to be able to do more. Corporations can do more, but so can schools, so can hospitals, so can social services, so can the police.
Thank you, Carlos.
Okay,
Francisco?
I guess I'm the pessimist here.
Yes, you are.
But look what's going on with guns in this country, in the United States. Um, Killings are happening increasingly more often with innocent people, children, and racial attacks, et cetera, et cetera. And we know what the problem is. There are just too many guns. And yet we're unable to address it in a serious matter in Congress, which is like, one of the major governing bodies to regulate that. And we have a Supreme Court that's not helping. So I don't know what's going to happen in the next elections. I don't know about the alternative right. My feeling is that we are slowly moving towards a very fascist country, in which case, when you're talking about large numbers of unemployed people, you can put them to work in hard labor camps if they don't obey, and if they're going to be stealing stuff. Then you just declare a military, what do you call it, state, and what do you call it, urgency, or emergency, martial art, martial
Law.
martial
Martial
law.
law.
You just declare. I mean, Trump wanted to do that with respect to the elections. He wanted to use martial law to undo the elections. So we're already there. So in terms of large numbers of people being unemployed, if the ruling class, really, to put it where it is, if the ruling class are willing to support the right wing in terms of pushing the ideology that profit making is the number one value in this country, and we're imposing that also on the rest of the world through our capitalist system. If that happens, then the number of unemployed people doesn't really matter at all, because they can, the only way to address it, I think, is that this country is one of the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest country in the world. So the way I look at it is that if you have large, massive amounts of unemployed people, you have an aging population that just will not be able to work, then you take some of that wealth and you give it to people. That's what we did during COVID. People couldn't work, so we had a program that gave people money so they could buy food. And that's what we're gonna have to do in the future. When people are thrown out of work, we're just gonna have to give them a living wage without them working, and finding, like during the Depression, creative ways for people to paint murals, write poetry, write music, grow gardens, and it's a different kind of society. But if we believe that only those who are productive are worth helping, then that's a different story. So I think that we're at the crossroads. As a humanity, we can move into a utopia, or we can move into a dystopia. And unfortunately, I'm afraid we're moving more towards a dystopia.
Maybe we live in a dystopia.
I hadn't thought about this until right now. Something Francisco said, which sort of added on to what Carlos said, is the idea that obviously Trump, Republicans still don't have access to the voting machines. But if anyone in the world can create an AI software that can come in and control the computers, the election, the counts of votes, then the whole world is susceptible to being controlled by those few individuals. They don't even have to be of a political realm. Individuals to push the right buttons and get the right numbers of the election won for the highest bidder. If that happens, which I think is possible with quantum computers, when that's possible, then I think a lot of the theories, whether it be social, ethics, whatever, I think everything's up for grabs. I think, and I didn't mean to get to that point, but I'm sort of looking at the information you're sharing, and I am adding it up, and that's the conclusion I'm getting out of all this.
Yeah, but I mean, look at, without even going into the manipulation of voting machines, through mass media, they managed to brainwash people into believing that the election was rigged, that it was fraud, even though there is absolutely no proof and no evidence. And yet 30% of the Republicans or the voting people still support Trump. So you don't even need to manipulate the machines. They're manipulating minds through the manipulation to first of all, to stealing your attention, harnessing your attention, and then moving that attention once it's harnessed into a particular direction, ideological direction. And that's all you need. So even if the system works the way it is supposed to be, if they can convince more and more and more people that it was fraud, then you will have a civil war, because people will believe that it's fraud, even though it's not fraud. So to me, those are, I mean, artificial intelligence is also involved in the manipulation of minds. And so that's a good point. That's a good point, Armando.
It is a good point.
Gentlemen, Carlos, Francisco, thank you very much for providing us, all of us, myself and viewers around the world, to really take this serious in terms of thinking and the process of it. I welcome you back to future shows. I'd like to do part 2 of this. I can't thank you enough for being in today's program. And we'll have this up and available for the public and YouTube as well. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being on our program. We've had 2 wonderful individuals here, Carlos Bakota, Francisco Hernandez Vazquez, both PhDs. And thank you for your time and your insights. And I look forward to having you on future shows.
Thank you for inviting me. I like being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Armando.